Have you ever looked out the window and seen something that completely changes the way you see the world? Imagine you're driving down a busy street, lost in your own thoughts, when suddenly, something stops you in your tracks. Someone you thought was lost forever. That's exactly what happened to Shaquille O'Neal, a basketball legend. And it wasn't just a casual glance, it was a life-altering moment. What was once a mentor-student relationship would soon turn into an unforgettable act of kindness that left the world questioning how we treat those who once gave everything to help us. Shaq's eyes lock on an elderly woman sitting on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk of Los Angeles Skid Row. A part of him recoils. She's alone, frail, and wrapped in a worn-out blanket. It doesn't just stop at the sight, it's the familiarity that haunts him. But why? Could it really be her? Mrs. Henderson, his beloved elementary school teacher, the woman who had once changed the trajectory of his life. Shaq's heart races as he sits in his plush SUV, the warmth and luxury of his ride offering no comfort. He's overcome with confusion, anger, and an undeniable pull to do something. As a kid, Shaq had been insecure, unsure of himself. Mrs. Henderson had been the one who saw potential where he only saw limitations. Her kindness had ignited a spark within him, a belief that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than what others had told him he would be. Yet here she is now, abandoned by her own family, left in a city that devours the weak, the forgotten. He could drive away, continue with his day, and let the world move on as it always does. But that woman, the one who had lifted him when he was too young to understand the power of kindness, was now crushed by the weight of her own abandonment. How could he ignore that? As he watches Mrs. Henderson, the image of his once proud teacher shaking in the bitter wind, Shaq's anger swells. How had society allowed this to happen? How could her own children have forgotten her? He remembers her to sense her pride and joy. He'd heard stories of how she worked tirelessly, spent her meager salary, and sacrificed her own needs for them. Yet, here she was, a symbol of love and devotion, left to die alone on the streets. Shaq couldn't comprehend it, and he wouldn't let it go. He pulls the car over. The red light is irrelevant now. His former teacher needs him, and he can't just stand by. It's easy to look away when we see someone struggling. We've all done it, maybe not with the same intensity, but we've all walked past someone in need and convinced ourselves that someone else will step in. But what if no one does? What if that person is someone who shaped your life? Someone who helped you believe in yourself when the world was telling you otherwise? Can we really afford to ignore them? Shaq didn't just step up because Mrs. Henderson was once his teacher. He saw the injustice, the sheer neglect of someone who had given so much. But let's be real for a second. How many people are abandoned by their own families and left to survive in a cruel world? How many elderly people, teachers, and mentors find themselves forgotten when their usefulness to others fades? When Shaq finally approaches Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had once believed in him, their reunion is bittersweet. She's shocked, ashamed, and unsure if she even deserves his help. But Shaq knows better. He tells her, "You're not a burden, you never were." He insists on helping her, not out of pity, but because she deserves so much more than the cold, heartless world she's been abandoned in. Imagine you're a teacher, spending your life shaping young minds, nurturing talent, and providing guidance. Your work isn't measured in paychecks or material rewards, it's measured in the growth of your students. And then, one day, you're left behind, forgotten. But what happens when one of your students, someone you believed in, decides to give back? Shaq's commitment to Mrs. Henderson wasn't just about getting her off the streets. It was about restoring her sense of purpose and dignity. It was about reminding her and the world that teachers are not disposable. They are the ones who mold the future, and they deserve to live with the respect they've earned. As Shaq took action, from helping her with medical care to ensuring she regained her identity, he showed that even someone as powerful as him can't erase the need for compassion. His influence was the spark, but it was Mrs. Henderson's resilience that carried her through. Shaq's help didn't stop there. Over time, Mrs. Henderson's health improved. Her sense of self returned, and she was invited back to teaching a job she loved, but thought was long behind her. Watching her step into that classroom again, a woman who had once been lost in the shadows of Skid Row, now standing tall with a purpose, was a powerful reminder of what kindness can do. And it wasn't just her life that changed. Shaq learned that acts of kindness, no matter how small, can ripple through the world, changing lives in ways we can't always see. Helping Mrs. Henderson gave him something money and fame never could: a sense of fulfillment and purpose. The greatest lesson he ever learned wasn't from a basketball coach or business mogul, it was from a teacher who had never given up on him. The story of Shaq and Mrs. Henderson is more than just a heartwarming reunion, it's a call to action. It reminds us that no one is too small to make a difference. If a former NBA star can take the time to help someone who once helped him, what's stopping the rest of us from doing the same? We all have the power to change someone's life. It doesn't take money, fame, or power, it just takes kindness.